Meghan is hardworking, motivated, inspirational, and always up to date with the latest pop culture references. I recently reconnected with her from this podcast, actually, after she heard it and reached out. She has worked growing a brand with Aesop in Toronto and has since moved back to Montreal to finish university. Recently, she's also started her own business in beauty and health with a hand sanitizer. Meghan has many interests such as fashion design, health, exercise, and music. So please welcome her to today's show.
Thank you.
So maybe we could jump into the project that I mentioned briefly. So I also kind of started a business and projects more recently during the pandemic. So how did your most recent thing start? Where did the idea come from originally, I guess?
The singular good thing that came from the pandemic is that it gave us all kind of the gift of time. And I've been making my own products to complement the Aesop products that I was using for so long, that with the opportunity of just time, I was able to decide to maybe I could market a singular product to a larger mass. The intention was that it was really something that would be form and function. So hand sanitizer was definitely something that was a need. And when I first came up with the idea, it was when the pandemic had first really started. So there was no hand sanitizer, no toilet paper in any stores. So it was something that I could make because the WHO had actually released the instructions on how to make your own hand sanitizer that was compliant. And with my background working in skincare and interest, and I wanted to make something that kind of melded together the function of a hand sanitizer with fragrance and skincare as well. So that's it's an amalgamation of interest as well as a need.
Could you go a bit more into how your experience in business lends nicely into this? So how did that experience help you? What sort of things give you a heads up going into this of how to work growing your own business?
There's one kind of trait that I have is that I'll try anything once. And that's really lended to a lot of my successes in working as well. When I worked at Aesop, I began as the assistant store manager of the two Montreal stores. And then I was studying English literature and art history. And then they asked me if I would be interested in working in finance and moving to Toronto. So I kind of just said, sure, whatever, and worked as a North American payroll officer for 2 years. So that really gave me the opportunity to learn a lot about finance and the technicalities behind a brand. And I think for an accounting person or a mathematician or something, it seemed very basic, but for me, not having any background in it, I got to learn a lot from that. And then after doing that role for 2 years, I moved into an operational role where I was able to oversee the operational function for all the stores in Canada. That was such a gift of being able to learn everything from logistics, from forecasting to production to distributing and allocating product into different locations, of analyzing customer markets, even looking at what a store would need to function. So staples and paper and really basic things like that. And it really gave me a really well-rounded scope of kind of the little aspects of the business. We were 15 stores and a .com, but only a team of 6 people. And 3 of those people were creative. So it was a very skeleton team. And then I kind of got a chance to dip my toes into so many different things.
Yeah, I guess that's one thing, at least I've noticed doing a lot of my own projects. I don't know any of that financial stuff, business technical stuff. For you, has that still been an important thing, or how has it changed? The fact that there is everything online, does that make it easier to run a business or harder, or how does that work, the online aspect?
Yeah, I mean, I'm incredibly cognizant of the fact that I'm probably not the best at anything. So I'm not the best accountant and I'm not the best branding person or the best social media coordinator. But unfortunately, the brand is just me. So I am kind of required to do everything. In an ideal world, I would maybe have support or some more guidance. And I'm really lucky to have a really great group of friends and people that I've surrounded myself with that can give me really helpful pointers on things even SEO or, how to optimize your hashtags. The information's all out there on the internet. Like I said, it's just kind of about getting it and using your resources. And I think we're in a lucky enough position that you have the time and you have the will. There's a will, there's a way. You can figure it out.
Yeah, and I know also that people in your family gotten more into business business and entrepreneurship, what kind of role has that played? Does that influence you, or do you ever find yourself making comparisons with people in your family or other people in general? And how do you manage those comparisons? And, because everyone is at a different point.
So I grew up in it's a weird delusional household where like they don't think that they're like traditionally Asian, but they kind of are. And so there are those seeds of ideas of like what a regular trajectory should look like, whether or not my parents believe it to be like their guiding principle. It kind of has always influenced us a little bit. I do think that like the most important role that I have is to be a sister, and that includes my actual sisters, but also like my community as a whole. My sister is a finance analyst for Air Canada, but she's like an incredible artist, and she sells her prints on Etsy, and she's been incredibly successful in that. And it's been really nice to like be able to talk to her about our pursuits. I think in our group chat, my youngest sister hates it because she has no interest in that whatsoever, but it's something that we really like engage with a lot. So I would say there's definitely this like sense of like you need to be constantly moving, and I think I've definitely adopted that of like I'm constantly moving on to something else or doing a million different things. But I think we all acknowledge that we're all very different, and we have some overlap, and it makes for great conversation more than it makes for competition. We're very competitive though, so it's kind of interesting. It's like we're competitive, but it's in a way I think it's healthy. Maybe my sister's not competitive at all and she doesn't see me as competition, but like I see it as a motivating force, and I love to see her success. I even have the word sister tattooed on me because I'm that committed to them. I do really think that their success is my success, selfishly, maybe. I do want to see everyone succeed around me. So yeah, I think it's a healthy and great thing to be around.
And in terms of making comparisons with people outside of your family too, how do you manage that, and motivation as well? Like what keeps you motivated, or where do you look for like motivation besides your sisters?
I think it's hard because when you think about social media, we talked about like being online. It's so easy to compare yourself with a million different influences and kind of see where you're sitting. On the other hand, I think that it has given us an opportunity to see such a wide range of people's paths. And your podcast is honestly like one of those sources where we can see how you define success and how people have different streams to the word success, which has different definitions unto itself. So it's so abstract and kind of arbitrary. I would say that I'm, again, really lucky that I surrounded myself with a community of people that I really respect. It's almost been to a detriment to me when I was younger because my personal opinions of people were very linked to their work ethic. And so it was very hard for me to relate to people on a personal level if I couldn't see that they were striving for something more or pushing themselves in a certain way, because if that was the case, my determination just came across as being like way too intense and almost like would put people off. But then I didn't care, so I wasn't willing to sacrifice anything. And then in turn, like definitely played a role in my personal relationships. So now I think I've hit a point where I've surrounded myself with like really great people. And I also think that it's been great to be comfortable enough to reach out to people and feel like you can boost someone and make them feel good about what they're working on, and that continues to help motivate them, and in turn they become part of your circle, and kind of that's how you grow it a bit. So I just get a lot of inspiration from my friends and the people that I'm around now.
I'm like that too, though, in terms of people I'll gravitate towards. If I see that they do have good work ethic and they're motivated and like determined, that's something I even look for in people and like want to try to relate to those people. Part of it is, you're trying to surround yourself with people to like boost you up and help each other. I had a question around actually moving, and both you and I have moved cities. I moved cities twice, and it was always very tough for me mentally, like not being surrounded by family, friends, and just in kind of a different environment. But what was your experience like moving? How did you first decide to leave and go to Toronto, and what were some of the challenges you had there?
I moved because my job required it of me. Essentially, if I wanted to grow within the company that I was with, which I did want to do because I love the brand, I essentially would have to move. So I did that about 4 years ago. I hated it. It was also came at a really difficult time because basically the night before my moving truck came, my grandmother was admitted into the hospital and was diagnosed with cancer a few weeks later. It was a really tough personal time too for my family, and I didn't end up really finding my footing partially because of that, because I was coming back every weekend or every second weekend just to spend as much time with my family as possible, with my grandmother, because it was so quick and she passed away only a few months later. Kind of recovering from that and wanting to be with my family even more and spending time with them. And then less than a year later, my father passed away. Toronto represented a lot of loneliness for me. I guess in my mind, it was that I dreaded going back because it meant that I had to leave my family. And faced with this sense of mortality and all of this, I had like this existential crisis where I realized that I didn't want to be in Toronto anymore. Maybe Toronto could have been great had it come at a different time in my life, but it just wasn't great for me then. Ultimately, now I still have my apartment in Toronto. A good friend of mine's actually subletting it. So the door's open for me to return perhaps at some point. But I think for right now, at least, the associations I think are just a bit too tough, and I'd like to like move forward and think about other places. And I'm open to the experience, but the timing just has to be right. Like it's always just boils down to timing for things a lot of the time.
Maybe you could get into like the branding and kind of the aesthetic, the design. I'm also very interested in design and visual language, especially for me. I'm also fascinated, not just design, but the environment and how the environment influences us in different ways. And do you feel that way too? Like, how do you approach your environment or creating an environment that's welcoming for you or like overall kind of positive? Do you think it can influence how you live and your different moods?
For me, I think more about like a mental space than I think about like a physical space, especially now because we're in quarantine. Like the environment of your home, especially if you're living with your family, can be quite tedious or even overwhelming sometimes. So I think clearing a mental space for yourself makes the biggest difference. Or going for a walk, I try to go for walks in the middle of the day as often as possible. You know, also like flipping it to like thinking about your last question about like the city that you're living in and being in a new environment from that perspective too, like it does play a role, because if you don't like where you're living from the beginning and you have this like negative perspective, you're never going to get to the mental space that you need to find that like peace to get your work done. I think it's kind of like it goes both ways, right? Like it has to be about a good marriage between the two of giving yourself the physical space to clear your mental space. And then ultimately that is what's going to propel you forward. I do have like a huge interest in design. Part of it too is like you think about design, you think about that design is a lot about the planning stages. It's a lot of manipulating the back end of it as opposed to like what you see is really like the surface of what the design is intended. Oftentimes I'm about situating myself or planning out what I'm going to do in a way that it makes the actual day-to-day operation of it or the actual like use of it on a day-to-day basis very seamless. So if I create this like structure for myself where like I'm going to go for a walk or like I'm going to exercise, I'm going to do these things, then I'm kind of like forcing myself into this environment of this is how it has to happen.
Yeah, more like designing and like structuring your life in ways to make you be a better person or be like the person you want to be. That's definitely something that I'm very aware of and try to do too. It's like give yourself any opportunity you can to help yourself be better, and structuring it is a kind of an easy way to make those things happen.
Like always kind of tricking myself. It's like you hide the money in your coat pocket so that it's like a fun surprise later on, or like you set your watch to like be like 5 minutes fast so that you always like are not rushing to places after.
Those little things do make a difference, I think. Okay, so you talked about like the mental space and how that's more important maybe than the actual physical environment. But if we think about kind of these other spaces like the digital space, like in a lot of cases we're interacting with that space. I mean, even more now that everyone's kind of stuck inside, but like it was already kind of a thing growing with just social media and kind of the shift of almost everything happening online. For brands too, it's very important to create space. What do you look for in those types of spaces, and how can we create those spaces that are better?
Yeah, I guess I'm very controlled about that type of consumption. A few years ago, I deleted like all the social media apps from my phone, which I feel like is like a thing that a lot of people say that they're going to do to like control their consumption. But like since 2016, I think I haven't had like Facebook on my phone. And then with Instagram, but like I've got like 5 different Instagram accounts, and like each account like follows a different category that I'm like interested in. So I don't always like post on all of them, but like this way, like I have a lot of interest in design and wellness. Then there's also like celebrity follow that you have interest in because they sometimes post funny content or something, or like Chrissy Teigen, or that's kind of like my id level. But I don't necessarily like think that it's of value for me to constantly be like consuming that. So it has to be like very intentional for me to like go after that type of information. So it's kind of like I'm almost creating this infrastructure where I'm trying to like control myself from like the types of information that I'll be exposed to. But yeah, the same thing with like a brand. It's like how are we, because now I have a brand, I need to like stay on top of what similar brands are doing or what the wellness space is talking about. But how do I do that while remaining not as influenced and just keeping true to myself is like another layer of a challenge. So I try not to like follow too many. It's like a game. It's so hard to like balance it out. I think none of us are really perfect at it either, because we're all just trying our best to sort it all out. And every time you kind of do, something changes. My sister gets the majority of her information from like Snapchat and TikTok. I don't even have Snapchat or TikTok. I don't even know how to manage that. So it's so different to navigate, and I won't pretend that I'm the best at doing it. Like I just come up with a system that kind of works for me and seems manageable for me. And that's obviously going to evolve in some other way in the future. I am pretty like diligent about what I post online, because I think your digital footprint is going to be there longer than maybe we even realize, because it's so new to everyone still. I won't lie and say that I'm not considerate about like what I post online, only from a way of protecting myself as, you know, a professional or as an adult person in this world. And I just kind of think about the repercussions. But at the same time, I don't think I really filter what I like based off of what people think. You know, if you look at the companies that I've worked for, they've all had integrity as their core values. And I think that I really take that with me too, is like trying to inject as much authenticity in what I pursue and what I am interested in. The different Instagrams are more like not to expose like a certain version of myself in the world, because they don't deviate, because in the end, to their core, if you put them all together, they are still me. It's just figuring out how I can manage myself, which is always a struggle.
Yeah, that's the thing, because you want to be authentic and honest. You don't want to have to think about what someone else is going to think and that influencing you. But I guess there is this level of permanence to like, once you put it out there, like you have to be aware that people are going to make those judgments anyways, and they are going to be out there. So you can just kind of manage that.
Yeah, like I don't have like, I don't use those like close friends functionalities or anything where you're kind of like filtering out based off of the people who follow you, like what they see. Like I don't believe in that. My general thing is like anything that I post, I need to really stand by. So like it's got to be out there for everyone. But if I'm really not sure about it, then I just like won't post it. Or like if I'm not really not sure about something, like if I can't stand by it, I'm not gonna advocate for it.
There's also the level of, with this stuff at least that I've found of yours online, it's LinkedIn, for example, it's very much like supposed to be like a professional thing. So you have like that in mind too, I guess, as you create that and write about that. You kind of know, or there's a certain audience that's going to be looking at that, and I guess subconsciously too, you'll even think about what they're looking for. But it's hard to kind of manage that and still be like authentic.
Yeah, how do you manage all of the different facets of your like personal brand? I think if you're showing a true version of yourself, even if it's a version, if it's still you, that still comes through. You know, you kind of don't have to show everyone everything all the time.
Yeah, because that's the thing. We're all multifaceted people, and we still have like these other parts of us that come out more in different instances, but we're all kind of striving.
The unattainable superego.
Thinking about that idea of social media and maybe media more generally too, like I know you're taking in a lot of things, whether it's like music or stuff on Instagram or whatever, and kind of what role do you think those things have in your life, and music maybe in particular? Like I used to be kind of someone that I would always have music on or something. Why do you think we do that? Like if we're always trying to like listen to something, like do we just want to be connected or feel a certain way, or what do you think on that?
Well, at first I thought I had ADHD because I was constantly needing to consume as much as possible. A few years ago, I tried an experiment where I would keep a log of all of the content that I was consuming. That stopped after like probably about a week because it just like wasn't manageable at all. For me, music is not something that I listen to when I'm trying to focus on something else. I listen to music because I'm going to focus on the music. So if I'm going to focus on something else, I'll listen to like a podcast or something because it seems like it's like a conversation in a coffee shop or something. And then I also keep track of like these tiers of like podcasts that I definitely want to like take everything in, like Malcolm Gladwell's Revisionist History or Radiolab. Like I really want to take in the information. So those ones will be ones that I'm listening to, and I'm really trying to be a little bit more diligent. To like podcasts, I listen to like a lot of the NPR podcasts, and those are just kind of like things that I'll listen to when I'm doing work. Audio is one of those things like you can't shut off your ears. So it's a great way of consuming information and media and getting new perspectives while you're doing other things. And there's like this kind of satisfaction like of having accomplished more than you thought was originally humanly possible in that same period of time, because you were engaging like multiple senses. And I think with all that more information, you kind of get new perspectives, and there's like all these other layers to it, obviously. obviously too. So that's kind of where I sit with the amount of media that I consume. I'm very diligent about the time that I spend on Instagram and stuff. So like I do set limits for myself. It's more for me now thinking about the quality of the media that we consume versus like the quantity.
Yeah, I guess that's something too. I value a certain quality of media and a lot more aware of where I'm spending my time. And I don't even want to just spend my time in stuff that's not of a certain quality. But I guess it gets back to the thing too of like the different facets. Like sometimes I'll just want to do something mindless, but that should be a very kind of small portion of your time. Yeah, I guess this idea of constantly ingesting media and stuff though, do you see any downsides to that too? Like how do you think that's affected us as like human beings? This is only very recent that we've even been able to do this.
I guess, I mean, I started listening to podcasts like when I was still in elementary school. I think that I've always been interested in those types of things. Or Apple TV first came out, like I think it was like in 2007 or 2008. It's interesting because we're kind of at this age where like we definitely didn't get it as much as maybe some of like our younger siblings did, or the amount of media. And I also think that the way that they receive it is like in these like very short, like 15 second, like 1 minute blurbs, versus there's almost something like old school about like long form podcasting. I mean, now that you're also involved in media, do you find that yourself like you're listening to more, or?
I would say I'm definitely more aware of what I'm taking in, and yeah, aware of like time too, right? Time spent on certain things and just not getting myself stuck into things that are not productive or not bettering for me. But I think this idea of, I'm getting at that idea of like, how has that affected us? I'm thinking especially of maybe not even us, but like younger people constantly being exposed and involved with social media and how that's affected us as like humans, particularly like health wise. Are there any sort of challenges to that? I do think it is a great to be able to access all that, but how can we do so in like a positive and like a healthy way?
For me, I see way more positives than negatives. Like you definitely have like those news stories where people like are not discerning enough to figure out whether or not a political ad is not from like a foreign government or something. Like there's definitely like those negatives, or you find that people, like a lot of kids, they're not able to concentrate on things that are more than like 15 seconds to a minute. But at the same time, like let's look at all of these like social justice movements that have been born again based off of exposure. When we're able to share information and we democratize information, then that kind of raises up a lot more. We kind of are all collectively getting smarter and more aware. And if we're all responsible citizens, like we use that information.
That positive side too, I think, can't be overlooked. And in relation to social issues and social justice, obviously we've seen a lot of that taking place on like Instagram recently. And yeah, this awareness is growing and I think it is positive. Yeah, how do you approach like social issues, social justice, and also in relation to growing a business too? How do you approach not just like the business side of a business, but like doing good and having this kind of social responsibility or social like component to it too?
I am someone who has been conscientious of social issues. I wouldn't say that I'm always been the best person to advocate for everything all the time. I do get like a lot of anxiety surrounding like, am I doing what's right? And ultimately I've decided in the last few months or last year that complacency and silence is playing a role. So you kind of have to push past that fear and that anxiety and like just do the bit that you can in order to make a difference. I think that's really important for everyone. No one is ever really only looking at you anyways. So you kind of have to push that like sense of like ego aside. It's always been really important to me. When I lived in Toronto, one of the most fulfilling things that I did was I volunteered once a week tutoring. We worked with a organization called the Together Project. I organized a group in my office, and the Together Project's an incredible organization where they match Canadians with groups of government-assisted refugees, and then you in turn get a chance to like help them navigate life in Canada. So that was something that I really took with me. And originally when I started OKness, Together Project had this fund for COVID, and they were translating all of the materials that were being released from the government and making all that information available to those families or these refugees that were maybe not getting all the information, all the resources that they needed. The idea, kind of going back to OKness, is that the product is linked to a concept And then the concept should then in turn serve a purpose within the community and be linked to a cause as well. So originally when I developed the hand sanitizer, it was all about practicing safe touch and having this kind of like cheeky nod to like just wanting to touch things and people and finding a way of doing that safely and just returning to like our senses in a certain way. And I was going to donate a portion of the money to this Together Project initiative. But then ultimately, after the killing of George Floyd, there was this uprising for the Black Lives Matter movement, and that just seemed to be a more pressing need for our society at the time. So I decided to donate all the profits from the hand sanitizer to that cause. And I was really worried about doing that too, because I didn't want it to seem like I was trying to draw attention to the brand and using this as like a marketing ploy. So it was like a hard like balance between the two. But I was a student and I honestly wasn't working and I couldn't donate that much. And we're in Canada and we're in quarantine and I felt really limited in like what I could do. But what I felt like I could do was generate income through this product and donate the profits from that. I donated the amount of money for an entire run that hadn't sold yet so that the money could go into the initiative like as soon as possible and then kind of like recoup the money eventually later on in time. But I think it is our responsibility that every dollar is a vote. So when you spend your money, you are supporting an industry, you're supporting a business, you're supporting a mindset. So it's your responsibility to be socially responsible enough to pay attention to what you're spending your money on. And that's kind of as a small business, I had the opportunity to do this and to donate the money and I kind of took that. But I also wanted the people that would buy my product to feel comfortable and knowing that this is not just a cash grab and I wasn't just capitalizing on a virus and a shortage of hand sanitizer, that it was really about serving a higher purpose.
I think about that more too recently, of how spending your money is really kind of like a vote, or you're giving value to things by putting money into them, and that shows what you value.
Yeah, there's this perpetual anxiety, like, am I doing the right thing? But I think it kind of circles back to like, don't say no to anything. Like, it's better to do a thing that incrementally seems to be heading in the right direction, and then you eventually get to the good place versus doing nothing and just like stewing about like what could have been or what could be right or wrong, or is this the best version? It doesn't have to be the best version. It just has to be like a slightly better version than where you currently are.
Yeah, and building off the idea of not just having a brand or business that is capable of doing or having a voice in terms of social issues and social responsibility, but also in terms of other issues like mental health is kind of a big component of like my life in general. And I kind of build that also into what I do in terms of what kind of stuff I devote my time to and how I wanted to impact people. And, I want to be able to help people in some form in that respect. Do you kind of see that a link with kind of mental health and following professional like pursuits and business pursuits? Do you think those can actually promote a healthy life for people? And how important would that be for a business to promote mental health, well-being, those types of things?
It's like a really good question, especially like where we're at in quarantine and in the world, or like even in our age group. It's like, is what I'm doing fulfilling me in a way that can bring like long-term satisfaction or like long-term happiness? I think is something I think about. For the longest time, I would only like apply to jobs with companies that I believed in their values, because I knew based off of the type of person I was that if I'm working on something, like all of myself is going into this work, like everything. I would always be the last one to leave the office. I would go home and I would work even more. And that for me was fulfilling. But again, like the changes in my personal life, I kind of am looking at this interesting distinction between my job and my work. My work being the thing that fulfills me or elevates my community or contributes in a way that I find is fulfilling. And then my job is the job that I do that allows me to be in a position to do that. Now, if you can find a way to marry the two, like that's amazing. Like that's great. If I can find a way to make okayness my dominant form of income, and everything that I'm doing is about producing a product to serve a goal and a purpose that is then able to donate the money to a cause, like in that case, I'm both fulfilled emotionally and mentally, and also honestly financially. I think I steered away from, being this part where we went to ROAS where everyone, so many people ended up being doctors or engineers or lawyers. It's this very single track version of what is doing good work. But in actuality, what has been defined as doing good work is actually just having a a good job. We're no longer kind of in a place where that is enough. And that's, I guess, the idea of okayness. It's about finding that homeostasis of like, okay. So it was meant to be, the name is derived from the concept of wellness, but wellness just seemed too aspirational to me. I just wanted to like just be okay and just do a small thing. And that's kind of where I sit. I think ultimately if I can find a space where I can feel really good about what I'm doing and also have a great job, and great job being so many different things beyond just like what the values of money are, then I'd be super happy. And we're all kind of wrestling our way to getting there. It's just, when does it happen, or when do you come to that realization of like what you're willing to sacrifice?
Yeah, I like that distinction too between job and work. And if you can marry those, and that's kind of like an ideal situation.
Yeah, and if you kind of try to force something to be both without it being ready to be there, then you're ultimately like setting yourself up for failure, because it'll never fulfill you in the way that you need it to or that you wanted it to, because it was never meant to be that to begin with.
In terms of thinking about mental health and also kind of the situation we've been presented with, on the one hand, COVID has kind of amplified feelings of like anxiety and social anxiety, because there's this real kind of manifestation in the physical space of like avoiding people. It's kind of like promoted by the government, like you got to avoid people, which is kind of a weird thing. At the same time, it's given an opportunity to us to like focus and really spend time on these other things and on these projects, and not having to think, oh, I'm missing out on this other thing. Yeah, how do you see that link with COVID and your mental health and like your work? How has the pandemic kind of impacted all these things in your life?
Yeah, it's so funny because my therapist, I'm going to be like, my therapist said, but my therapist has the complete opposite opinion of its effects on me, because I do have anxiety. So I've actually like not had to take any medication since COVID, because for me, it was this not fear of missing out, because I would constantly be trying to remove myself from situations, but this pressure that I put on myself to constantly be productive also lends itself to like the social aspect of things, where I was like, I need to keep up with maintaining relationships and friendships, a juggle, and you're constantly like trying to keep all the balls in the air. And with COVID, it was almost like the government was giving you the excuse to like not have to do that. So for me, it was this like huge relief of, I can manage these relationships in the way that I can, but also reevaluate what are the types of relationships that I do want to maintain. You know, am I texting these people or following up with all these people because I feel like I have to, or because I really want to? And I've realized that there's actually so many more people that I care about how they feel on a day-to-day basis than like I had even thought. But then there are some people that, you know, maybe we were just checking in out of routine, and that's fine, but those weren't like the fulfilling relationships that I need to like break my head over. I also moved back to Montreal like right before quarantine too. So it was like this weird thing of like, a lot of people didn't know that I was back in Montreal in the city and that we could hang out. And so then they kind of wanted to hang out, but then like, actually, psych, we can't hang out because we're not allowed to hang out. So this is like funny back and forth too. But yeah, I think it's actually been kind of nice to like be at home and do things digitally.
I thought about this too, just because very recently, like the government did institute another like heightening of these kind of restrictions. I'm hard pressed to say I was like glad about it, right? You know, because it does symbolize death and like suffering from a lot of people who are having to go through this. So how do you think we can like reconcile that? I don't want to have pandemic be the cause of what makes me be okay and do good things. We want to kind of bring that into our lives outside of this situation too. How do you think we can do that?
We just need to flip our mindsets. Right now, you think of a form of care or expressing affection and tenderness and love as like maybe a tangible physical thing of giving them a hug or hanging out with them or making them dinner or something like that. And we just maybe at this point need to understand or really process the fact that the way that you show someone that you care for them is like honestly to stay away from them. And that's how you are ensuring their safety and you're thinking about them. And I honestly will just sometimes like when I'm in a car or something, I'll just text people and my friends and I'll just say like, hey, how are you feeling today? I hope that you're staying inside, or like I'll send them a recipe and be like, you should try making this while you're at home, just to let them know that you're thinking of them and you're thinking of their well-being. But you thinking of their well-being doesn't necessarily mean that you need to be in their space. we're just kind of shifting our mindset there a little bit.
But I guess thinking about going out of this situation, right? How do we navigate that too? Is it just kind of back to normal, or like how's that gonna happen?
I guess we don't really know even how long this is gonna last for. There's a lot of question marks, and I think that what's kind of comforting is that those questions are the same questions for basically everyone in the world. And how we navigate that really depends on how we navigate ourselves today is what's going to influence what happens in our future. I can't, just for my own sanity, stress too much about what's going to happen next year or what's going to happen next summer, because I'm really just trying to get through the next few days or the next month or so. I will say I really do miss seeing my grandfather. I used to go to my grandfather's house for dinner every week, and I love that. And I'm sure he loves it too. But we FaceTime, and I guess we do the best we can. And I let him know that that's how I'm showing my love for him, is just by calling him every once in a while.
Building on this idea of the future, and there's all this uncertainty, and with COVID it's just kind of brought that more to light, the uncertainty, but the uncertainty was always there. How do you approach the future, and what's a good way for you moving forward and thinking about the future?
Where I am now is definitely not where I thought I was going to be a year ago or 2 years ago or 3 years ago. It's kind of you have your 3 to 5 year goal, and that's constantly shifting. It's always changing with these new influences, and sometimes they're great things and sometimes they're not so great things. Would I maybe still be in Toronto if my grandmother or my father hadn't passed away? Maybe not. But then there's also the great thing is that still super close with my family. My sister's here, and after my grandmother passed away, I started calling my grandfather every night just to see how he was doing, and that's helped us forge we already had a great relationship, but we are very close now. So I guess the uncertainty of the future is I can't be hard pressed to think about it. I always kind of sort through things in my mind between a controllable and an uncontrollable. In business, you have your controllable expenses and your uncontrollable expenses, and after a certain point, you can only really focus on the controllables because there's always going to be a million things that you can't control. So I guess that's how I kind of approach my entire life now. It's you can't control the virus and you can't control all these other things. You can't control who lives and who dies. It's really, on how you manage these types of things moving forward. And kind of cheesy, it's to live in the present, but really that's all we can really do right now. And incrementally, you'll be a better person if you are in every moment deciding what's a slightly better thing to do. And I think that's kind of where I'm kind of trying to head, is that in the past few years, is that the decisions that I make are informed by the information that I have in the moment. Maybe I didn't react to things in the past as well as I could have, but I reacted the best with the information that I had. And, as you get more knowledge and you grow and you learn a little bit with time, you kind of make slightly better decisions, and then you grow to be a better person. And that's kind of where I sit now with the future, is that I'm just trying to get as much information as possible and do the best that I can today and tomorrow to serve myself and my family, my relationships, my community as a whole, so that, when thinking of the future, you're thinking of who will you be in the future to contribute to that future.
What would you say to someone who would want to follow a project they want to do, or start some sort of business? What's something that's really important maybe they should know?
Well, I guess their first real mistake would be to ask me for advice, because I don't think that I could dole out the best advice. But I guess in general, you kind of you got to try it out and you just got to do it. You can't over analyze it, or you can think about a million different things, but in the end, it's not going to be what it is. So kind of accept that, you do the best that you can, and don't be afraid to make changes to your plans, because you're going to need to. I think just being really agile and flexible is just a quality that I think serves any new entrepreneur or someone who's starting a project.
Do you want to share a link to I know there's the okayness. Where can people find all these things?
You can check us out on Instagram. It's at okayness, and then the website okayness.com. And currently we have hand sanitizer, and there's also going to be new products launched by the end of this year.
All right. Well, thank you, Meghan.
Thanks for chatting with me.